I guess I don't know much about life outside of Brimfield. I was never in a car before. Never saw a man pick his nose with a hook before.
Flashback to the mid-90s when I, as a somewhat naughty young man, decided one night on a lark to show my grandfather one of my favorite movies, the Farrelly Brothers' Kingpin, which I had a well-loved VHS copy of. I thought I was being pretty bad because my grandfather, after all, was a much older man that I assumed was somewhat conservative. Yet, when this movie came on, I remember him laughing hysterically throughout, especially at what I thought would be the grossest moment when Woody Harrelson comes out drinking from a bucket that he thinks is milk, but alas, the people that he's visiting don't have a cow. They have a bull, meaning he's drinking, you know. Of course, that's just one of many gags in the Farrelly Brothers' Kingpin, which is this week's best movie you never saw.
Buckle up, my friend. You're about to embark on a great adventure. There's a tournament in Reno, Nevada. The best bowlers in the country are going to be there. With my help, I think you can beat them. You hear me?
So, Bobby Farrelly actually has a movie out with Woody Harrelson right now called Champions, which reteams the actor and one of his directors anyway, and is kind of a nice, feel-good, uplifting sports movie. In some ways, Kingpin is also an uplifting sports movie, if you consider bowling a sport, that is, with Harrelson playing a shady, washed-up bowling prodigy who strikes gold when he finds a naive Amish player played by Randy Quaid. Yes, Randy Quaid.
Hey everybody, there's a shit cloud coming! Run for your lives!
Who he hopes to exploit for profit. The two hit the road with a gangster's moll played by 90s dream girl Vanessa Angel in hopes of striking it rich at a $1 million winner-take-all tournament in Reno. In the mid-90s, Peter and Bobby Farrelly were riding high off the success of Dumb and Dumber.
Want to hear the most annoying sound in the world?
Although, having been released at the peak of Jim Carrey's first wave of stardom, there were those that thought it might have been a fluke. Thus, for their follow-up Kingpin, the Farrelly brothers opted for a more unconventional piece of comedy casting. In the lead, they cast Woody Harrelson, who, despite being no stranger to comedy, after a very long role as Woody the bartender on Cheers, at the time was coming off a starring role in none other than Natural Born Killers.
I ain't gonna murder anybody on a wedding day.
So, he wouldn't be the kind of guy that you'd naturally choose to lead a PG-13 studio comedy.
Shut these, you close those, and you just feel it. Oh!
Same has to be said for Randy Quaid, who, it turns out, was a last-minute replacement for a far more conventional choice, Chris Farley.
Well, maybe I don't look the part.
The movie actually got rave reviews, with Siskel and Ebert especially loving this movie, just raving about it. And it also had excellent test screening results. But the film opened with a thud at the box office in the summer of 1996, a victim of perhaps ill timing as it came out the same weekend as the Atlanta Olympics bombing. It grossed only $25 million domestically and did very little business overseas, only to eventually turn something of a profit when it became a cult hit on home video, which, of course, is where I discovered it. And you see, Kingpin is one of my favorite comedies.
Oh, I'm his type. I'm every guy's type.
I sometimes get a bit of a reputation here at Joe Blow for not being easy on comedies. And it's not that I don't like comedy, far from it, just there's nothing that I hate more than an unfunny comedy. There's nothing worse than being in a movie theater when it's supposed to be funny and you're just kind of sitting there watching people laugh all around you, knowing that they're just being polite, not knowing what they're laughing at. I feel like I experience that way too often, but then again, the studio comedy has been dead for many years now, so I guess when I watch these unfunny movies, I tend to be doing it from the comfort of my own home, where I can be a little bit easier on them. Too often, filmmakers and performers mistake being loud for being funny. There are a lot of actors like this. But in their heyday, the Farrelly brothers were funny as hell, and this is probably their best work. Of course, many of you will think I'm nuts for including it here, as it's built up a solid cult following over the years amongst those in the know. A lot of you would say that it's not actually a best movie you never saw because, hey, a lot of us have seen it. I still think it's underappreciated, though. People always say Dumb and Dumber or There's Something About Mary's is the best Farrelly Brothers movie. But to me, Kingpin is better than both of those.
It's round, it has 3 holes, and you stick your fingers into it.
You leave Rebecca out of this, mister.
Kingpin, if anything, is proof positive that you can have a PG-13 rating and still be hilarious. You just need to be a little more clever in what you show and don't show, because yeah, Kingpin is actually PG-13. Woody Harrelson is hilarious in the lead, going full tilt in a scuzzy comic performance that I don't think a bigger name like Jim Carrey would have been able to pull off.
Yeah, I'm unable to have children. Nasty, cheese-grating accident as a young man.
More established comedian would have probably gone for pathos. Instead, Harrelson just goes for impishness. He's naughty, and you wonder why he's so rarely cast in legit comedy roles. Randy Quaid, God bless him, as crazy as he is great as his simple, innocent Amish sidekick.
I mean, I can figure some things out for myself.
Given Quaid's public meltdown some years later, it's tempting to forget how versatile he was, but consider this. The same year he did Kingpin, he also stole the show on Independence Day, did 3 TV movies, and found time to do a cameo in Spike Lee's Get on the Bus. In his day, he was legitimately great. And of course, there's the delectable Vanessa Angel, who I must admit, was the reason 14-year-old Chris rushed out to see this movie.
I didn't want to be the one to tell him, but with those narrow hips, that girl couldn't have more than 6 or 7 children.
At the time, she was at the peak of her Maxim magazine, oh my god, she's so hot fame, being pretty big on TV's Weird Science, which of course I watched all the time.
Must be tough when you're spanking your monkey.
You have a monkey?
It's too bad this wasn't a bigger hit, as she's not only quite funny in the film, but also gives gravitas to what could have just been a two-dimensional hot chick part. I think the Farrelly brothers have actually always been really good at this. See Caitlin Olsen in Champions and see, how good their female roles can actually be. Notably, the film also sports a supporting role for Bill Murray, which was unusual at the time because back then he was still fronting studio comedies. You wouldn't typically see him in supporting parts, and he was uncredited here, but his performance wasn't really a surprise because he was advertised quite a bit in most of the ads.
I pulled out really early on that one. Sorry, thanks for coming.
His participation apparently had a lot to do with Randy Quaid, and most of the dialogue is just him riffing. He's hilarious as Roy's adversary, sporting a memorable comb-over. None of the guys fare well in the hair department in this movie, and Murray, for his part, looks like he's having a total blast playing a scumbag. I mean, some of his lines in this are great, especially when a waitress comes to serve him and he tells her not to come back until she's washed off her perfume.
Do me a favor, will you? Would you mind washing off that perfume before you come back to our table?
I thought that was the funniest thing I'd ever heard when I was young, but boy is it mean. There are so many iconic moments in this movie, from Woody Harrelson's Roy Munson seducing his gross landlord, played by the great and beautiful Lin Shaye under layers and layers of dirt.
You really jarred something loose, Tiger.
To Randy Quaid's Amish Ishmael being propositioned by Chris Elliott a la Indecent Proposal.
I will pay you $1 million to sleep with your friend here. $1 million, one night.
Like a virgin, touched for the very first time.
A nifty nod to one of Woody Harrelson's biggest hits. Ah yes, and who could forget Vanessa Angel's trip to a fridge to grab a couple of beers. But best of them all, of course, is that moment that I mentioned earlier, and it made Grandpa howl with laughter in the Witness spoof montage where Harrelson juggles milk from a bull?
I took the liberty of milking your cow for you. It took a little while to get her warmed up. She sure is a stubborn one. Then, pow, all at once.
We don't have a cow. We have a bull.
Oh yes, this movie is hilarious, and it's available on Blu-ray, DVD, and Amazon Prime and a bunch of other streaming services. So, while Kingpin may not be as obscure as I'm leading some people to believe by its inclusion here, I still think it's totally underseen and underappreciated.
What do you get something like that?
Prosthetics are us, aisle 6, right next to the glass eyeballs.
It's a legit comedy classic that holds up pretty much better than any other Farrelly Brothers movie, and one that can be watched over and over again. And I know, because I've watched this movie dozens and dozens of times. It's simply the best.